So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario, this one by DF Morris, and welcome to Mirkwood. As you can see, it's going to be quite an interesting battle this, because to be honest with you, there's only so much of the defending side that I'm going to be able to see from this perspective. Now you can see that several of them are going to be on the roads, but I was given both versions of this, and I think Morris wanted me to show the attacking version, and I think this is because this is clearly going to be one of those battles where the defenders are going to be able to utilise the terrain and ambush the enemy quite a lot, and it's better if we can play along with that a little bit and see it from the attacker's point of view, to see how they would have to react to this sort of thing, rather than as the defenders, of course, where we can see everything ahead of time. So it's going to be quite interesting, this. I'm sure that there's a geographical region that I can give this video a name for as well, but it's meant to be the Mirkwood border. As you can see, this is the very edge of the Mirkwood itself, and we're going to be seeing several forces of evil trying to march into Mirkwood to take it away from them. Starting off with Tundra's Fox, who is playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Now the Misty Mountains, they are going to struggle to deal with Mirkwood at long range, of course. They do have their crossbows, which could be a pretty useful tool. However, the Misty Mountains also have got so many goblins in their army that they can absorb a fair amount of arrows through sheer attrition, more so than the armour and equipment that they carry. Heavy Goblin Archers also can fire back at the very least, and Mirkwood won't be wanting to waste too much ammunition on the likes of them. But having said that, they too are going to struggle, I think. Depending on how Mirkwood have set the table, the Heavy Goblin Archers shouldn't be allowed to get that sort of engagement off, especially seeing as how Mirkwood can just stay in hiding until they choose to commit a lot of their units. Snaga Skirmishers may come into play a little bit later on, definitely the sort of unit I would save until later, because committing them early is just going to result in Mirkwood filling them full of arrows very, very quickly. The armour-piercing Heavy Goblin Spears. Mirkwood, though, one of the more lightly armoured factions in the game, generally speaking, much more focused on their melee defence. Some of their heavier units, though, do pack on a bit more armour, so that's where the armour-piercing can come into play, but those units tend to be higher tier, and that's, of course, where the Heavy Goblin Spears will continue to fall down, but there are a lot of them, and they do have a decent shield, by Goblin standards. The Heavy Goblin Halberdiers. Now, one thing Mirkwood do completely lack is a phalanx unit, of course. They and Rohan have that in common. So if the Heavy Goblin Halberds can get into melee, they could be a surprisingly good equaliser for the Goblins. Having said that, they're also going to be uniquely very vulnerable to all of Mirkwood's missiles. Heavy Goblin Infantry, which individually are pretty low quality. Of all of the really basic Orcish / Goblin line infantry units, they are the worst, outside of the really, completely garbage units which cost barely any money at all, but they kind of don't count. They're more fodder than actual infantry. Heavy Goblin Infantry, they're going to be here just for numbers and hopefully to absorb a bit of punishment and maybe try and overwhelm some of the Mirkwood positions, maybe get into some of their skirmishers when Mirkwood aren't looking. Goblin King's Bodyguard, which are a decent little unit to put your general in, which is of course where Azog is going to be hanging out today. Decent for a bodyguard unit, just because of their numbers more so than anything else, but obviously other factions have got better examples of similar units. Black Uruks of the Mountains, if they can get into melee, they can defend themselves a little bit better than most of the other Misty Mountains units can, because of that higher melee defense, but once again, no shield could very well turn out to be a problem for them. Orc Mangonel, that could be really, really useful at scattering some fire along the hillsides to really panic Mirkwood a little bit. I'm sure as well they won't be taking too kindly to the fact that their woods will be set aflame. Blackback Mountain Berserkers, again, another unit which can do an awful lot of damage. We've also got some Cave Trolls, some Snow Trolls, 2 units of Blackbacks actually, and some Bolgs Champions, so a bit of cavalry which could be used to counteract any Mirkwood riders that may be lying in wait. Then, moving on to WK, playing as the Witch Realm of Angmar, much bulkier than their Goblin neighbours. So they'll be able to take a bit more punishment, maybe not the Scourge Raiders, they're still unshielded. Even with the armour upgrade, they're still going to be one of the first ports of call for Mirkwood's archers, but those throwing axes could be really, really useful against the more lightly armoured Mirkwood troops. The Blackwatch Legion can push through lines, although having said that, I don't think Mirkwood will be relying too much on really solid choke pointy-like defence. I feel as though their best bet is going to be to try and pull the enemy apart a little bit and use the trees to their advantage, so the Blackwatch Legion may be only coming into play later on. Orc Fellers, which are on Blackguard, Trolls, all of the heavier units back here with Gundabad Guard, which are on Hammer Guard, more Scourge Raiders, and also Angmar Marauders at the front. They're the equivalent of the Heavy Goblin Infantry, just to their side. The Angmar Marauders I think are a little bit better though, but there are less of them per unit as well, so it all balances itself out from a certain point of view. More fire though, Witches of Angmar, I'll be interested to see how they perform, because they could be really, really devastating, as we've seen several times in the past, but they could also be focused down very easily by all of Mirkwood's arrows. And there's also some Guardians of Khan Doom. Then we have another Misty Mountains army under the command of EMYN. He's got some Warg skirmishers, so some more mounted forces from the Misty Mountains, which could be useful for scouring of the initial forests. Snaga skirmishers, more blackbacks and black uruks. Heavy goblin crossbows. I really feel as though if they can be saved till later on, and if Mirkwood are a little bit too liberal with their ammunition, they can end up being a really, really useful tool, but we'll see how the Misty Mountains want to play that. Snow trolls and cave trolls once again, and then the full gamut of heavy goblin units as well. Halberds, infantry, spears, with some archers and some goblin infantry out the front. He also has some fearmongers, which are a significant upgrade on the regular heavy goblin halberds. Then we have Mordor, played by Froggy. He has got some Moran on guard at the front, some Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Again, I'm not sure how useful the Great Shield units will be at pushing through enemy lines, but both they and the Blackwatch Legion may be useful for actually their shield value, which is not often that you say that sort of thing about them when people just know them as being that bulldozer on the front line. But having that big old shield will make them a far less tempting target for any of the skirmishers that Mirkwood have lying in wait. Moran on infantry back here in numbers. The Orc Maulers will, again, they're better on the attack, but they're very fragile. It's the sort of thing that Mirkwood can certainly take advantage of. Minas Morgul chosen. Orc Javelins, some Sauron's Will back here. They're bulkier than the Orc Maulers at the very least, but have very much the same sort of problem against a faction like Mirkwood. Temple Guard, armor-piercing arrows. One of the few units of archers Mordor can field, which Mirkwood would do well to respect. And then there's also some Moran on halberds and some Olag High out on the flank. And finally, for the attacking armies, we have another Mordor army played by Mr. Sneakman. Moran on guard, Minas Morgul chosen, Moran on infantry. He's got some Uruk captains in here, the armor-piercing bodyguard, as well as some upgraded temple executioners, so more of a focus around that upper-end infantry. Halberds and maulers, again, more unshielded stuff. Another artillery piece in the Troll Counterpart, which can move much more quickly, and the crew is less likely to be cut down mercilessly by all of those archers. Moran on archers and some Orc javelins as well. So let's see what they have lying in wait for them. Of course, we'll only be able to see so much. D.F. Morris himself has got some Sindar of the Girdle a little bit further forwards. Very, very fine cavalry unit indeed. There is this river which splits the forest in two. There's the initial grounds, which I'm not sure how much of Mirkwood is actually back here, and then as you fall back across the bridges and across the river crossings, it may become more of a traditional defence. But I don't think Mirkwood should fall back too easily. I do think they need to be taking advantage of all the room and all of the potential for surprise they have in front of them, especially against 5 Orcish armies, which is a hard thing to beat. Hiriak, 2 units of those heavy spears. Hiri out, so yeah, the heavier Mirkwood units are back here. Hiri Peng, some Mirkwood artillery as well. The Ents, of course, which will act as an interesting counterpoint to the attacking trolls. Elders of the Elven King. Elvel and Hammerguard. There's actually some Dorwinion forces here, which is quite interesting. Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud playing as them, so they have come from the east to help Mirkwood out. Morroquendi Glade Masters, a unit which wouldn't be out of place in Mirkwood. Morroquendi Pikes. Got some Elvel infantry. It gives them more of a heavy-duty aspect to their army, with all of the Elvel and the Dorwinion can field. And then there should be, yes indeed, another force over here from Lango. Once again, Mirkwood. This army has got some upgraded Hiri Lang, so a little bit stronger. Elven King's Palace Guard, that dual-ended glaive unit that everyone so adores. Elders of the Elven King, Hiri Lang, Woodland Protectors, some more of the Hiri Outh and Hiriak. Interesting to see the differences between, he hasn't just upgraded all of the units, some of them have got the armour upgrade and some of them have not. We've got some Sindar of the Girdle over here, and then I saw previously, as indeed, a catapult up on this hillside over here. So, I will make a bit of a cut because I'm not sure how soon the battle will get underway. I'm not sure how quickly the attackers will decide to move through the initial areas. But I will rejoin when we start to see Mirkwood let the orcs have it. Firing already, it would seem, using the catapult to try and hit into the vast array of goblins that are marching into Mirkwood immediately. Heavy goblin halberds leading the way, which is an interesting choice. If there are archers nearby, the heavy goblin halberds would be a very good target because they simply will die off so quickly, and you do need to deal with those phalanx units, even with the addition of Dorwinion having those Morroquendi pikes on hand, which would be able to make quick work of the heavy goblin halberds in melee. They're such a soft target to archers that you would really do quite well, I think, to utilise that. A hit there into the heavy goblin halberds, but nothing the Tundra's Fox will care too much about. I wonder if he simply forgot to move that catapult. I don't think so, otherwise he would have started moving it back immediately. It would be quite the mistake if that's turned out to be the case. Meanwhile, back over here, the Sindar of the Girdle still yet to move. Mr. Sneakman starting to make his way inside of Mirkwood. Froggy will also be doing the same. Mordor here in the south, the Misty Mountains, and Angmar in the north. Lango moving his Sindar of the Girdle as well. And what do we have here? Surely not. Surely this is not the case. Heavy Goblin Halberds. Maybe there isn't a way up from the front. It's kind of difficult to tell what is passable terrain and what isn't, but that should be very passable by the looks of things. And Tundra potentially has the opportunity here to pick off this catapult, and that would be a huge loss right from the off. Would be very, very poor if you were to lose the catapult simply because you forgot to move it. One of the most important tools you can have. It may be that it was such a colossal error in judgment and it would affect the result of the battle so badly that they've pulled rank and told Lango, or told everyone to leave Lango's catapult alone. I personally would not be in favour of that. I think you should be punished for such things, and I think Tundra's Fox may very well agree because the Bold Champions are on the way. And you can see there the Kelvin River Patrol are here. So here is all the hidden units. Now he could have gone directly up and over. So here is all of the ambushes revealing themselves. Kelvin River Patrol cancelling that javelin throw there. And there also are you can see the ants knocking over their own troops. But with the Morroquendi Glade Lords, yeah, the Bold Champions are going to hold fire there. Morroquendi bows are in the background as well from the clips. A little bit surprised they weren't up on the hilltop just already. You can see there are the Woodland Realm Axemen, so he did have an ambush there. A little bit surprised to have not seen that used a little bit more quickly. Let's see here, Morroquendi bows are going to try and get into the flank perhaps, but that will leave them exposed. That's 3 units of there. Nandor Glade Guard revealing themselves. Now if they can get their charge off, these goblins are going to be in all sorts of trouble. Fantastic unit off the charge, a little bit lightweight in terms of the armour. But that won't matter too much. You can see this was a little bit... I mean, they may very well break the heavy goblin infantry very quickly, but it's a little bit ambitious to assume you can get your Morroquendi bows into the flank that close to the goblins and not expect them to try and get into melee with you. And there you can see the Snow Trolls also getting in amongst things. The Snow Trolls shouldn't be in melee against the Nandor Glade Guard this early, I don't think. They're exactly the sort of unit that will make pretty quick work of trolls in this kind of setting. Meanwhile, through the trees, yeah, I mean, they have got Morroquendi bows in melee, so it's not a complete wash this for the goblins, but the heavy goblin infantry are not going to be enough on their own to be able to make much of a dent here into these purple-clad Avari. Meanwhile, what have we here? You can see here the Sindar of the Girdle looking like they are trying to cycle charge. Oof, this is one of those battles that it is going to be a little bit choppy in the early stages here. Woodland Realm Axemen revealing themselves from an ambush position. Slightly less effective, this ambush, I think. Yes, they have the backup of the Sindar of the Girdle, but there's less infantry here. They're further away from the main body of their army across the river and the support. And also, there's more of the Mordor army directly here, so they should be able to use their muscle to break through these Woodland Realm Axemen without too many issues. You can see that Woodland Realm Axemen do already seem to have taken a fair amount of damage. They're a good unit, the Woodland Realm Axemen, but Minas Morgul Chosen are tough and tanky enough to withstand the damage from a non-AP unit such as this, especially when they have plenty of Morannon infantry backing them up as well. Meanwhile, over on the other side, looking like Snow Trolls are coming back for another bite of the cherry from Tundra's Fox. We've got Black Uruks coming up here, the Woodland Realm Axemen from Lango joining in with the Morroquendi and the Avari that are on top of the hills here as well. The Ents have decided to join in on the fun, as well as some Morroquendi Glade Lords, which the numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for these heavy goblin infantry. Ents, Glade Lords, Woodland Realm Axemen, none of which the heavy goblin infantry are anywhere close to being able to deal with, and they're going to end up routing here, which is a problem here for the goblins. Numbers are their best friend, and the more of these more numerous lower tier units rout, the more their better units are going to be isolated, and then that's going to be a problem. But yes, certainly a big focus here on how much damage they can do early. The heavy goblin halberds also routing under the weight of the advance here from the Nandor. Still the Snow Trolls are in the background here, and you can see the goblins are all starting to flee. managing to keep hold of this hilltop very nicely. The Elvelyn now arriving on scene to add a little bit of armour to the equation as well. This will definitely help consolidate the gains that the defenders have made up on this hilltop. But you can see here the Nandor Glade Guard continuing to hound the snow trolls. This could be a problem for them, but there's more trolls back here as well, the trolls from Angmar. There are so many trolls here that these more lightweight Glavemen are going to start to take damage at a fair rate of knots, but this also means, of course, with the trolls of Angmar on site, this means that Angmar have arrived in support of their goblin brethren, which means that Dorwinion and Mirkwood will have to be a little bit more careful now. They're not just fighting the one army anymore, they are fighting two, and there is an almost point-blank shot there from the Mangonel, but it was a direct hit. They didn't get the fire shower effect, the almost Roman candle-esque thing that Mangonels do have going on, and with an angle like this it is much more likely to just thud into the hillside, which makes the Mangonel much less effective, but they need to be quite careful with this. If it grazes their own man, all of these low-tier goblins and Angmar marauders that are making up the main body of this assault may very well end up running for the hills if they aren't careful. Meanwhile, Froggy pushing up to the hilltop over here, managing to deal with those two units of Woodland Realm Axemen. Much less substantial ambush over here. Having said that, if we look down here at the bottom of the hill, plenty of casualties on both sides. Yolag High are marching up the hill as well. Not enough casualties from a defending perspective for them to be that happy with it, but they still have both of their units of Sindar the Girdle in very fine order. So if they want to, they can try and find some gaps as Mordor try to advance through the trees. Having said that, they do need to be a little bit careful. Mr. Sneakman has got his Mounted Temple Inquisitors, who, while they won't outright beat Sindar of the Girdle in melee, it's not the sort of thing you want to be bogged down with as you're trying to find gaps in your opponent's defence. It does look as though they are going to retreat here with Bolg's champions moving forward. I quite like this move, honestly, from the defenders. When Angmar arrived on the scene, you need to know when to cut your losses and retreat. We've seen a couple of times recently the defenders fail to do that, and it was their undoing. You could say maybe they've retreated a little bit too soon, but I think on this occasion I think it's better safe than sorry. If you stick around there, you open yourself up to being hit by the Mangonel, you open yourself up to the potential of the Witchers coming in and bisecting your lines, whereas over here you have much more control over that sort of thing, and you can still engage in the kind of woodland ambushes back on this side of the river after you get forced off the initial crossing. But we're going to see a much more standardised defence over here, I believe. Sindar the Girdle over there. There's something else over here as well. What is that? That's routing with the Realm Axemen. I thought perhaps there was another unit of cavalry over here, but it seems I was mistaken. There's a lot of roads across the river though. Plenty of choices for the attackers. We shall see how many of them they decide to try and take, because I've always been an advocate for trying to pressurise as many fronts as you possibly can. If you do that, it's very hard, especially in a 5v3 for the defenders to deal with that. There's a floating rock. But we shall see if the attackers decide to try and do that. You can see Mevon's Misty Mountain Army coming right up through the middle here. A couple of kills there on the Sindar the Girdle. There's more walks around here as well, so yeah. Maybe not quite as much woodland action here in the first layer as I personally would have liked from a map such as this, but it's understandable really. It would be quite difficult for the attackers to spin that many plates, especially given the quality of forces they are going to be going up against. The Mangonel is going to be firing. Now this sort of terrain a little bit flatter. It thuds into the side of the cliff though. That one does hit, and that does manage to grill, narrowly missing the catapult there, managing to tag the edge of those Nandor Blade Guard, who are already looking pretty battered and bruised after their exertions in the fight for the hill just across the river. Valin Vanguard of that. I'm a little bit surprised honestly to not see the catapult try and take that Mangonel out. It's not quite as effective in Reforged as it is over in Silmarillion, but it's still a dangerous tool. Like if it manages to catch you with that showering effect right in the middle of a unit, it can really do heavy damage, and that's not the sort of thing you want happening to units like these Hiriak who are in these blocks on the front line, because that's going to be how Mirkwood are going to be contributing most of this front line. Those blocks of heavier units by their standards. Mangonel moving around now. Meanwhile over here, Yes, indeed, we have the cavalry continuing. Actually, no, we don't. We have a unit of Hiri Lang, which I suppose they were hidden and they were discovered, and so Morris has decided to just throw them into battle now. Armour upgraded as it is, they're a strong unit, and you can see that from the fact that the balance of forces is still even for a while there, despite the fact that they are being overrun on all sides. They will take their fair share of orcs, but this is definitely not the most efficient engagement here for these Elven heavy swordsmen. And that won't be how they wanted this to go. Hiri out coming from the trees, more Hiri Lang, so yeah, maybe should have been a little bit more unified with how they approach that. Another unit of Hiri out coming in. They've still got the support of the Sindar of the Girdle, which honestly, that's going to have to be how they do most of their damage here. They do have the opportunity to find some really good gaps as Mordor try and overwhelm and deal with all of these infantry units. Hiri Lang charging into them around on infantry. That fight is certainly going to go in their favour initially, but just look how many orcs there are ready to push forward and assist the front ranks. There is also a unit of Hiri out here as well. Mordor are going to try and use their numbers, leverage their mass. This is also another problem, however, that the elves have to deal with. The fact that the attackers have cavalry as well. Those Temple Inquisitors are here. The Hiri out are going to carve their way through those Morannon infantry, but they need to try and deal with this cav as well. They don't really have the numbers to do that with. Nice to see another ambush though. Just as I was fearing there wasn't going to be another one, we do see more of this, and Mordor are going to take some damage on their manpower count, but will it be an efficient engagement? Sindar of the Girdle being intercepted by the Temple Inquisitors. At this point they're so bogged down that they kind of have to stay there. The problem is now that you can see infantry moving forward to try and help things out. The other Sindar of the Girdle unit moving in, are they going to get a charge off on the Temple Inquisitors? You can see it's not a great engagement for them, especially not with a charge. In come the Bolg's champions. It's a bit of a mess, as ambushes tend to be. Now here this Mirkwood infantry, which I'm sure the orcs will, especially something like the Bolg's champions, would do a really good job of charging into the back of this Mirkwood front line as the Morannon units continue to throw themselves in here. Minas Morgul Chosen moving in, which really are going to be trying to be the buffer against those Sindar of the Girdle. Hiri out, there simply isn't enough of them though, and that's the problem. I think the way that initial unit of Hiri Lang maybe jumped the gun a little bit is causing issues, and now there is more problems for them. Orc archers up here on the hilltop. Those Morannon archers are going to be able to do some good damage. Ooh, and there you can see the Bolg's champions charging into the back of that Mirkwood line. So yeah, this hasn't gone as well for D.F. Morris as I'm sure he would have liked. The idea was solid, the execution room for improvement. It's not as if he's accomplished nothing, damage has been done, but I think it does favour the attackers when you consider it's a 5v3. Mirkwood will continue to fight, they will continue to do a little bit more damage here and there. As the Hiri out continue to mulch their way through here, but the Bolg's champions doing well. Tundra's Fox, I like the fact that the attackers have committed all of their cavalry down here now, seeing that this is the best area for them to be using such things for the time being. Tundra's Fox continuing to just bide his time over here. Catapult waiting as well. The deep breath before the plunge. And then, so far, Mevon's army largely untouched is going to be advancing through the middle while the two Mordor armies continue to tackle the south. Sauron's will moving forward. Surely they're going to break at some stage, the Hiri Lang, especially with the Bolg's champions on the way, and there they go. And there is still the small matter of the Sindar of the Girdle, which are going to make a nuisance of themselves. Hiri out are routing off. Where are the Sindar of the Girdle, in fact? They're retreating. So very much cutting their losses across all fronts at this point. Goblin infantry being that buffer on the front line. Archers. The cry of Illidan always means that the elves have decided to start shooting. Although the Hiri Pen there only shooting with one volley. So Mevon is finally taking a little bit of damage, and oof, look at that. Morroquendi bows firing in. Those poison arrows will be really quite effective against the goblins. As soon as the goblins even think about routing, the poison arrows will be enough to push them over the edge. Plenty of damage being done, not necessarily to the most important units, but most of those arrows are going to be hitting something at least and doing a bit more damage. But there's so much more where that came from a goblin perspective. Speaking of which, See some Snaga archers on the way forward from Angmar, and they too will be backed up by a column of heavy goblins. How will the elves and their Elvelyn squires decide to react to this? And it's going to be with a catapult, and why not? This is a big enough blob. None of this stuff is particularly high tier, but very good hits there. Large volume of kills. Archers, heavy goblin and Snaga, heavy goblin halberds. That was worthwhile, I would say. It certainly lets the attackers know that they're not going to be able to get away with blobbing up their units right in front of a catapult like that. So the attackers will need to be a little bit more cautious. But the Snaga archers are going to be moving in. What are they going to be firing at? The catapult crew, perhaps? Yeah, they are going to try and fire at the catapult crew. It does look as though they tried to burn it with the mangonel, killing off quite a few of the crew there. I have to say, Mirkwood... the attackers are forcing Mirkwood's hand here, because they're going to have to either move the catapult or use its ammo now, because using up the entirety of those Snaga's ammunition could very well be enough to kill off that entire artillery crew. Olakai, bloodied, here in the south. They're going to be going around the river. Hiriath moving backwards, Hiriak holding their position over there. But as we were saying in the last Silmarillion battle replay as well, there's still going to be quite a lot of hidden units from both Dorwinion and from Mirkwood, and that sort of thing can be nerve-wracking if you don't know where the enemy is exactly. You can make reasonable guesses in this sort of situation because it is a siege, but even still. Meanwhile, over here once again in the north is where we see things get underway. Heavy goblin halberds in there first of all, but the Mirkwood spears keeping a tight formation, and the heavy goblin halberds are good as part of a combined arms assault here against Mirkwood, but if they're all on their lonesome, the superior quality of these elven spearmen is going to be too much for them to deal with. The Snaga skirmishers are on the way forward, but getting a little bit too close to comfort there to the elven warriors, and they're going to have to pull back because the elves are now starting to push through the heavy goblin halberds. It's not often you see the elves push through the orcs, but there it is, and they do succeed in breaking the heavy goblin halberds. That will be enough to cause them to want to leave the area as well. The heavy goblin infantry may have something to say about that, although they're almost certainly going to rout almost instantaneously when they realise that the elves are going to turn around and simply start slicing through them. Heavy goblin archers moving into place. Once again, the attackers will be going for the tried and true method of trying to force the defenders' hand with some lower quality skirmishers. The Elvelyn infantry won't make that too easy on the heavy goblin archers though, threatening to move in and attack them. What are the heavy goblin archers going to go after? They're going to fire into the Elvelyn infantry themselves. As they turn their backs, of course, the shields won't be coming into play. So a pretty good idea, that. They could try and just absorb... If they're going to fire into the front of that Elvelyn infantry, that's worthwhile to just try and absorb if you're the defenders. That's exactly the sort of thing that the Elvelyn are good at. We shall see. Speaking of Elvelyn, they're now picking up the slack from where the elves are left off. The elven spears are pulling back and now allowing the human spears to have their moment in the sun. And easy enough to bulldoze their way through the heavy goblin infantry, once again trying to get at the Snaga skirmishers, try and deny the Misty Mountains some of those javelins. They do need to be a little bit careful. A single unit of Elvelyn Vanguard is only capable of so much. If one of the more deadly units of orcs come forward, they will need a little bit of support. That's where they differ a little bit from the upper end elven spears. Anyway, so heavy goblin infantry won't phase them too much. Normal goblin band, perhaps in greater numbers. The Ents shuffling around in the background. There's also some Hiri out there, so some elven line infantry, which would certainly be useful. Unfortunate there. Not stabbed in the back, but a mace to the back, which sounds excruciatingly painful. Nasty way to go. Elvelyn infantry is here as well. Still a bit of a game of cat and mouse here in the middle with Mevin. Having said that, Mevin is also on his own here in the middle, whereas Mordor in the south, two armies between them. And then, of course, there's the Misty Mountains Angmar combination in the north. So I can understand Mevin being a little bit more cautious, even if he is the one who has taken the least damage of the attackers so far, as Mordor continue to slowly pick their way through these trees down here in the south, trying to make sure there's no more nasty surprises lurking for them in the underbrush. But I don't think there will be. I think the defenders would be far better served doing something like this and standing in a surer place, and maybe saving some trickery for the later game now. Meanwhile, Heavy Goblin Spears pushing their way forward. Another example, this, of where the Heavy Goblin Spears armor piercing will actually be very useful against the Elvalin, but again, they're being committed forward in a bit of a pocket, more so than as a genuine fighting force. More arrows being loosed by the Snaga in the background. The Heavy Goblins will probably be joining in on that as well, but the Hirialth have got big shields. They're going to start moving in as well, and that Elvalin Vanguard does need assistance at this point, because there's a lot of units coming their way, and a single unit of spears is not going to be enough to stop the tide. But with a bit of Elven backup, the Hirialth in particular will carve their way through something like Goblin Band without too many issues. Archers are there. There's the Snaga skirmishers who are going to be using their javelins, trying to get some good volleys, and actually succeeding, finding a nice gap. The elves need to be a little bit more committed here and sort of force their units in a little bit closer, so that the archers, and in particular the javelins, don't have such an easy time of it. And the goblins seeing a bit of a gap here maybe to try and force a full unit of Heavy Goblin Spears through, try and consolidate these gains that they are making. Meanwhile, here in the middle, seeing perhaps a little bit more of a commitment. Heavy Goblin Halberds would perhaps be the sort of thing worth shooting. Elders of the Elven King are waiting. Woodland Protectors, still plenty of units hidden in behind cover that could be used at any moment. Heavy Goblin Halberds, as I said at the start of the battle, for Dorwinion it's a little bit easier to deal with something like that in melee, but we'll have to wait and see how they choose to handle this. Meanwhile, Hirialth on the way down here to this southern approach. Can they go up here? There's ruins up here, but I'm not sure if this is a place that you can actually put units on. If it is, you could try and get some rangers here and shoot into the backs of these units. That would be potentially really, really nasty. There's only a single unit of spears, but Ents and more line infantry on the way as Mordor continue their slow advance through the trees. Again, the perception of potential danger can be useful as well. You can see here as well Mordor with some Morannon halberds just occupying these bridges, and Morannon infantry. It's a nice formation that the Orcs have taken up. But not the sort of force that can cross the river and expect to get through something like Hammerguard, nor upper end Elven infantry. But they could start moving when Mordor start making inroads, and that could be a potential factor that we shall have to keep an eye on later on. And we are seeing an engagement now. Elvelyn infantry getting into melee, the Heavy Goblin archers thinking about getting a little bit closer as well. These Heavy Goblin halberds are in loose formation actually, which is a really good opportunity for the Elvelyn infantry, who would normally perhaps be a little bit more susceptible to the armour-piercing phalanx of the halberds. But in loose formation like this, the Elvelyn infantry are going to be able to find gaps in it so easily. And in close quarters, the Heavy Goblin halberds, needless to say, are not brilliant. And there you can see that they are getting cut down very, very quickly by the disciplined human units that we see there. Meanwhile, Ents moving in, some Woodland Realm Axemen that were left over. Plenty of Orcs and Goblins on the front line, but nothing too strong yet. You can see that the attackers are pulling their punches a little bit. Heavy Goblin Spears trying to force their way around the flank, but they were met promptly by another unit of Hiriek. Ooh, and there goes a Mirkwood General, and that I can only assume is from the Mangonel back there. Most unfortunate. I mean, to be fair, nothing else really in the Elven King, in the Elves of the Elven King, were actually hit by that, so unfortunate for Langer. I feel his pain. We've all been there. They go into hiding just a little bit too late. It's not going to matter too much though, because if they're going after the catapult, they could still end up hitting the Elders. So Langer really should be paying a little bit more attention to that, I think. Oof. mangonel hitting point blank, but actually hitting their own units as well, which is enough to convince those orc fellas to rout. That is going to be enough to completely stem the flow of this attack as well. Not enough quality on the front line, and the defenders can count that as being a bit of a win. Holding on to things nicely there. And here you can see they are actually going to engage, not against the halberds because they're a little bit more of a problem in a really narrow choke point like this, but Morroquendi, Glade Lords and Ents are going to make very, very quick work of a single unit up around on infantry. So they're going to be able to claw back some of those kills that they lost in the initial woodlands. Meanwhile, there is a pretty scary sight for this one unit of spears. A slew of orcs advancing through the tree line. And they're going to need a lot of assistance there. Another unit of Hiriek. What else do they have? Some Hiriauth. They do have some support coming from Dorwinion as well, including another unit of Glade Masters, so they're certainly not defenceless by any means. No one deciding to use this narrow path, but that's perhaps because it's a little bit finicky to use. We shall have to wait and see. Meanwhile, Elvelyn with some Nandor Glade Guard on the front line. Nandor Glade Guard causing the arrows to start flowing from that side of the river. Heavy Goblin Halberds trying to get things on lockdown a little bit more now, a little bit of a tighter formation. Going to try and use those halberds a little bit more effectively than they have done up till now, but the Elvelyn infantry continuing to show that when things get up close and personal, they are a superior unit, and continuing to push into those halberds, not allowing them to get set. And the more they do that, the more these poor goblins are going to suffer. And also with those poison arrows coming in as well, you can't imagine many of these goblins are going to continue to fight here for that long, which is the downside to a faction such as this. Morroquendi bows, of course, pretty decent in melee as well, as any heavier elven archer is. So they will continue to be able to pull their weight until the later stages. Meanwhile, oof, look at this. You can tell it's getting serious when the frame rate starts to dip a little bit. Again, more routing from the heavy goblin infantry. The catapult has been firing this whole time as well. Hiri Lang managing to hit there into the Angmar Marauders, which causes them to break as well. And this is the problem, all of these lower tier units, when that artillery hits them, they're going to flee. But now with stuff like Gundabad Guard arriving on the front line, shaken already though, I think the attackers are trying to put on the appearance of a really large-scale all-out assault, but unfortunately for them, not enough quality on the front line has bitten them again. They need to have a bit of a rethink here, because yes, it's dangerous to commit high quality when the catapult is right there. I don't think they have a choice though, because this is not working. They're going to need to do something here. Orc Javelins in support of a very large-scale Mordor assault down here in the south. Once again, Moranon units in extremely high supply. Warnsvam on Lanka up on the hilltop over there. They should probably start firing promptly. Keldon River Patrol are ready to use their javelins, and again they're going to need to, because so far it's actually the orcs using their javelins which are doing the business. They were trying to push their way through here with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, and that was the right time to do so, but they're going to struggle mightily against the Ents. The Olag High coming in. There's still a unit of Hiriauth in reserve, another unit of heavier elven spears on the way across as well, but Mordor is serious about this push. Javelins from on high, Woodland Protectors reveal themselves Palace Guard, so the defenders, more and more of them coming out of the trees. This is how it's going to be on a map like this. There's always more orcs, but the elves are always going to be able to pull out more units from the trees, it seems. And will the orcs be able to push their way through these defensive positions before their armies start to collapse? More arrows being utilised. I mean, you may as well continue to fire into these units with something. Heavy Goblin Archers trying to pitch in where they can. Does that mangonel still have ammunition, I wonder? It's already launched a fair few barrels across the way. Hiri Peng, a little bit scruffy, this front line at this stage. You don't want to get too overconfident just because you've seen so many goblins rout, because chances are they'll be back, and next time they come back, the attackers will have stronger units. The fact that they are bringing these Gundabad Guard to the front line means they are a little bit more serious now. Another full unit of Angmar Marauders on the way. Won't worry them too much, I don't think. And another failed assault here in the middle from Mevin, really. Pushed back by the Elvelyn from Dorwinion. So far, so good for them. As for the fight on the bridge, yeah, there was only going to be one true victor there. But this is now the epicenter of the battle. Mordor trying to force their way through what, it must be said, is the narrowest of the choke points available, and also it gives the elves a hill advantage, so not the nicest of avenues for Mordor to have to try and attack, but concentration of force here. Will they be able to make this pay in the long run? Orc javelins out of ammunition, perhaps, being committed to melee. More back here. Plenty of them. Orc maulers being committed to the fight. I mean, they will get shredded by the archers, as we said before, but in melee, they are capable of laying down a little bit more damage, even aside from the armour piercing. Here Pen continuing to fire. I think the Ents are all gone, but the Olag High will be following them pretty soon. You can see in and amongst here there are some Glade Masters still who are going to be really effective against units like Olag High. As one of them does fall, another of them falls, and a third one falls. Brutal for them. Arrows hitting those Orc Maulers as they continue to flee. Keldon Patrol out of ammunition, they're pretty bad in melee, honestly, but at this point just getting numbers onto the front line to stop the Orcs from being able to just bulldoze their way through with sheer numbers isn't the worst of ideas. What's going on over here? Are we seeing some action over on this side of the river once more? Because there are blue arrows over here, but I'm fearing that it's... No, it is actually genuinely units. Glade Lords have managed to find their way across. But there's Temple Guard, there's Moran Halberds. It's going to be hard with Warg skirmishers there, but what have we here? Nothing. Orcs simply flee. Evan still has more units. He's going to try and force the issue a bit with his skirmishers again, I would imagine. He kind of has to play this game, being alone in the middle. And seeing how his initial infantry forces did not do all that well. They're going to try it again here against these loose formation goblins, but they're pushing their luck if they think they can do it again without reinforcements. Another unit of Elvalin infantry would be required, because these units of Elvalin here are now very depleted after their heroics up to this point. They will need more, and another unit of Elvalin infantry, much healthier, is going to be moving forward, but again, the armour piercing from those goblin spears is going to be useful. We need to be careful there. Nearly disaster from Morris's catapult. Mevin doesn't have his reinforcements that close though, so it is worth being aggressive here. Without reinforcements nearby, you can really break the back of these assaults, which are all too small. And over here, this is looking a little bit dicier though, with the Blackwatch Legion at the forefront of that attack, which are on Blackguard following them in. Angmar definitely living up to their billing here as being that muscle among the Orcs. Scourge Raiders on the front line, Orc Fellas using those axes. And they are going to have to pull back, but where will they pull back to? That'll be interesting. Snow Trolls managing to get into the catapult crew, and finally the catapult is silenced, but it's been useful at the very least. This is very open, this part of the map. Having to organise a defence across a large part of ground is going to be quite difficult, so the Goblins and the Orcs here in this northern part of the map have got a real opportunity now to seize map control, massive amounts of map control away from the defenders, because they can come right down over here if they so choose. And you can see Eclipse knows that they can. He's going to try and organise some kind of defence. Morikwendi pikes, there's Hammer Guard. I think he needs the Mirkwood forces from Lango to come over here as well. The temptation will certainly be to retreat up here into the hill. This is intended, of course, to be the final stand as we go up the hills here to the back area, leading further into Mirkwood. Can they afford to do that though? I think they are preparing to do that right now. You can see they're starting to pull a lot back. They're going to have to leave a rear guard somewhere. Mordor continuing to throw themselves against this front line. It's only a matter of time before Mordor, without continued reinforcements over here, which they will now no longer safely be able to commit, it's only a matter of time before Mordor break through over here as well. which conversely will also allow Mevin to start pouring on more pressure in the centre. And we've seen a lot of siege battles go like this in the past. The defenders do quite well in some initial choke points, but the attackers have too much left in the tank by the late game. They've given themselves very little. They've got nowhere to go oftentimes, the defenders. And that sort of situation. Now, Valiant Infantry fighting well here on the front line against yet more goblins. The more they can kill now, of course, the less they will have to face and deal with later on. Heavy Goblin Infantry, there's still a lot of Mevin's army left, of course. Temple Inquisitors in support from Mordor. Mangonel pushing forward. What have we here? Heavy Goblin Spears. Perhaps a little bit overextended relative to the rest of their army. And Eclipse perhaps going to use these Nandor Glade Guard as a bit of a rear guard, and in so doing, perhaps try and kill off goblins as efficiently as he possibly can. Still some Sindar of the Girdle as well. Good opportunity perhaps for a nice charge. Yeah, and those Heavy Goblin Archers really not enjoying that, so a nice little pick there. More goblins fall, and more damage they can do now. It could be crucial as the fight continues. This is true. If the Orcs can just play the battle by the book from this point, I see very little that the defenders will be able to do to reverse that tide. Unless they have something like Rangers in the final stand, that might be enough. Volk's Champions moving through. Once again, a very depleted unit of Nandor Glade Guard is all that remains. And the goblins will move forwards. The rest of Mevin's army will start to cross as well, I have little doubt. Is there a way up the hill from this side as well, I wonder? If there is, then it's... Well, I say that, it doesn't look like it. And that's the problem. If you're going to retreat, if you feel as though your front line is falling, you need to communicate that to your teammates. And on a map as wide as this, you need to be ready to coordinate your retreat, and that may not have happened here. Mordor continuing to grind away against the Mirkwood front line. Still, these heavier elven units proving to be more than a match for the basic orcs in a straight-up fight. How much longer will they be able to keep this up, however? And there's always more orcs, it seems. Another unit, 2 units in fact, of Moran on guard, trudging towards the front line. Although, to be fair, Mordor have taken a lot of damage. They do still have reinforcements back here, but it's not quite the legion it once was. What have we here? Hiriouth fighting off against the goblins. Very mismatched in terms of the quality of line infantry on display before us. Those elves. How long can they realistically stay here and continue to fill their boots in terms of kills? Not that much longer, you would imagine, with snow trolls charging to the aid of their goblin fellows. Back over here, the victorious attackers in the north. A little bit scattered perhaps, they've got plenty of time to reorganise their armies. Maybe a little bit too stretched though, they need to be a little bit careful to not just charge right on in. Hiri Pang firing in. Right into the Goblin King's bodyguard from the front. Not going to fall in droves from the front, it must be said, but it is a general's bodyguard unit. If you can assassinate the general, that could be just another thing which would make it life very difficult for Tundra's Fox at that point. His army's already very depleted. And to have all of his basic units constantly on the verge of routing would be tough. Snow Trolls, exactly the sort of thing that was needed to help break the spirit of these elves, as well as the bones. And over here, yeah, this is always the sort of thing that was going to happen. You can see reinforcements are going to be committed over here. Froggy sending over some Moran on halberds. They will be able to surround this front line, which has performed very, very well, you would have to say. But there's also this beginnings of this happening now. The Moran on halberds really starting to find their footing, and that phalanx is going to start doing work from the front as well. So everything's going to be coming up Mordor on this front line. There's also still some Palace Guard in here, which would be a tragic loss indeed. Sauron's will making their way to the front line, Mordor continuing to keep the pressure up. Elsewhere, Yeah, nice charge from the Warg skirmishers in the back would certainly do the business. 3 Woodland Protectors are routing. Not the most deadly unit of cavalry, but it would be enough, I think, to cause a fair amount of panic. There they are, bumping into that elven front line. And this surely now is going to be heralding the end. Not many of those wargs even falling there, only one, well 3 actually, at the hands of the deadly Palace Guard. Not there for quite long enough, it would appear. A rather nice vantage point here, but the Wardens of Ammon Lang just running out of ammunition, it would seem. Pulling out their axes. Over here, meanwhile, again, taking to the front foot a little bit, and once again, Tundra's Fox finds some of his units, which have overextended a little bit, fleeing after the defenders were not shy about using their units a little bit more aggressively. There is the Mangonel crew. Where are the Mangonels themselves? There's poison arrows as well. More goblins falling by the wayside. Goblin King's bodyguard is still there, a few of them bloodied up after enduring a few volleys themselves. The rest of this force also still a little bit... I saw the witches for a second then. That's exactly the sort of thing that the defenders need to be on the lookout for, but this is a nice defensive position. Mangonel's very, very close. They will be able to remount them if they just keep the crew out of harm's way for a little longer. Still some routing units back here. I'm really surprised, honestly, if the elves were still putting up a fight. It looks like there's a lot of red on the mini-map over here, but ultimately those are mostly very, very depleted units, which are now getting overrun. There goes a Palace Guard at the hands of one of Sauron's most faithful. There is another Palace Guardsman. Some Uruk captains in there as well. Surely this is going to be the end for him. Going up one hell of a fight though. There he goes. And that is going to be victory for Mordor, but at what cost? I mean, Mordor are looking decidedly worse for wear. They will have to act in a supporting capacity for the remainder of the battle. Around on halberds. Are there still units up here that are potentially hidden? It's very possible. Mordor clearly seems to think there is, because these Moran halberds are... Actually, no, are they pointing that way? It's kind of hard to tell. Half the unit is pointing one way, half the unit pointing another. There is the other way up, however. 2 directions to try and hold on to, which will, of course, funnel into one later on. Here we Peng now, taking the place of the Wardens of Ammon Lang. Quite a lot of those arrows thudding into the dirt. But yeah, you can see what they're going after. The Blackback Berserkers, a very dangerous foe. Definitely the sort of thing that can win you a match late on. And now it's just a case of how long the attackers want to take getting into position while the elves take pot shots at them. A cancelled shot. Plenty of orcs just biding their time. I think the idea here is to wait until Mordor is ready to lend some aid as well. Such as Mordor is now. There's still a fight going on here, apparently. Is there? Yes. Alvelin infantry, officers of which. Interesting that the Alvelin infantry were the last ones left alive there. Most peculiar. Elsewhere. Have we? Skirmishers? All of those units are just routing ones. So we can now safely say that, from what we can see, we can safely say that the elves are now bottled up on the hilltop at the back, but they could of course still have a few hidden units in trees sequestered away in what the attackers now believe to be their territory. I guess it's time for times 6 speed, because it really is just a case of waiting until they're ready to move forward. There's only so much I can say about the elves shooting at them with 1 unit of archers at a time. Wardens of Ammon Lang taking a few hits, presumably at the fearmongers. Certainly not worse choice. Are they going to attack now? They don't have quite the same luxury as they did previously here, the elves, where they can afford to lurch forward a bit more, with the attackers having access to far more manpower far closer than previously. They're going to be making their way through, just having a little look. It's even in terms of the percentage of kills, but that is certainly a good thing for the attackers. It means they've managed to not fall behind as often the attackers do in a situation like this, and they won't have to rally in the late game, which you would imagine they could still do. Catapult in position. Important to perhaps still have a bit of artillery. Could send a lot of those very entry-level goblins fleeing for the hills. Still nothing in terms of an outright commitment just yet. Actually, and once again, it is actually the defenders who do decide to move forward aggressively, baiting the heavy goblin infantry to come perhaps a little bit too close. And now the elves will be able to fill their boots with yet more goblin kills. Those elves are going to do a lot of damage, but the White Uruk Fearmongers marching their way forwards in formation as well. A very dangerous unit for Mirkwood to face. Good phalanx units always are if they don't have the missiles required to bring them down. Warg skirmishers getting into place. They still have javelins, and there is the troll catapult crew trying to use their own artillery to bring down Mirkwood. If they can take care of Mirkwood's artillery, that would be a huge win for them. Those warg skirmishers continuing to throw javelins at point blank. I'm amazed the defenders are letting those wargs get away with that. 1 or 2 volleys would be enough. Oof. Cutting through the heads there of some of those orcs. I think they are actually going for the catapults, are they not? No, perhaps not. Where is that troll catapult? Am I blind? Well, the wargs are now retreating after, finally, the Elvelyn are committed to the front. The White Uruks won't fold quite so easily as the heavy goblin halberds that this technique has worked on so effectively at so far. Nandor Gladeguard in pretty healthy numbers actually, and they will, once they get in and amongst these goblins and White Uruks, actually be quite effective at doing some damage. The Troll Catapult might not be hitting the catapult that it is intended to be, but it is getting some kills at least on those Morroquendi pikes, who could still be a massive factor in this battle. Pikes in the late game can be so difficult to handle. The Troll Catapult is a fair distance away actually, it's still in range, that's impressive. Black Uruks on the way to the front line. They will do better in melee, as I mentioned at the start. They're much better built for at least withstanding the elves a bit better. Going after the Goblin King's bodyguard maybe? Or are they going after the Mangonel crew? They could be going after the Mangonel crew. But if they don't hit them, then they will at least hit some form of goblin. Still some halberds there as well. Goblin band on the way forward. The Elvelyn ready to meet any advance that comes its way. Let's not forget they need to preserve some ammunition for the Witchers, lest they suffer the same fate as many before them have, being grilled. Woodland Protectors, javelin volleys coming in, and they will need that I think, because the orcs are more and more showing more intent to try and push through this initial defence, and the defenders have committed their Morroquendi pikes, which is a statement of intent. They intend to hold this area for a fair amount of time. Those javelins finding their marks into the Black Uruks and also to some orc maulers that have arrived on the front line as well. Those volleys, that damage is really starting to add up now. Elves of the Elven King and Wards Vamon Lank up on the high ground. And they're doing well here. Still not quite enough quality on the front line, you would suggest. There are some Black Uruks and White Uruks now, but I think a bodyguard unit or two is required to really keep this attack going. And this could be a bit of a red flag. Very often in this battle we've seen the attackers' assaults completely fall apart and they have to start again from their beginnings, which is always a bit of a sign to be concerned. You can see more Morroquendi pikes on this front line as well. They're going to need to use numbers to try and force their way through these, you would assume. Angmar Marauders and Goblin Band on the front line is not going to be enough to get through the glaives of the Morikwendi. Those poison arrows as well are certainly not going to be helping matters, and they are going after one of the softer targets. The Scourge Raiders, not half bad in melee, easy to kill with arrows as well. You may very well end up routing them at some stage as well. Those Scourge Raiders still have ammo, definitely the sort of thing you want to be dealing with, because one of the better counters to the Morikwendi pikes that the attackers have is going to be these Scourge Raiders at this stage. Blackback Berserkers is a little bit more like it. There is a bit more quality, more readily committed over on this side of the battlefield, you would suggest, and a little gap is being found. The defenders are going to need to respond to this. WK has found the gap. He's going to try and push through some Scourge Raiders. He's also going to try and push through, much more worryingly, with the Witchround Blackguard, which is going to be a much more difficult thing to get rid of once it's there. Those two units would probably have a damn good go at doing so. The Glade Masters and the Hammer Guard. Over here, it's a much lower tier affair for the attackers, continuing to try and use their trash to wear the enemy down. The attack is still ongoing, albeit it is going further and further down the hill. They're being pushed back. Do they still have enough around on archers? Mevin should have enough. He shouldn't have taken enough damage to the point where he's struggling. You can see here the Scourge Raiders trying to push their way through. But the Hammer Guard are in here now. Hammer Guard to the rescue, and the Glade Masters heading to the centre of the line and try and help deal with this glut of lower tier garbage, but also they will be the sort of thing which can definitely stand toe to toe with the Blackback Berserkers. I'm not sure what that was. That's probably a Mirkwood general, I would suggest, given the fact that the Palace Guard are also on the front line. Plenty of really high quality units from the defenders now, but do they have the numbers? The Orcs continue to flood forward with more troops. Can they keep a cohesive line, or will more gaps be found? You can see here they're continuing to try and wrap around. I mean, these Scourge Raiders will ultimately not be successful, but the fact that the defenders have clearly had to contort themselves a little bit to deal with that situation. They're going to need more units on the front line as well, because there's Blackwatch Legion here trying to force the issue. Throwing axes, coming in now, doing some damage there to the Morikwendi bows. I'm actually surprised the Blackwatch Legion are not force pathing their way through, and they're not committing more infantry to follow through on that. Maybe they feel as though they don't have enough to do that, but in so doing you would surely create enough panics to the point where the Witches could potentially be used as well. Cave Trolls being sent in, out of ammunition weapon protectors being added in to help strengthen the front line. The Goblins and the Orcs trying to push around the flank, and they're being successful in doing so. Sauron's will being at the heart of this attack once more. Woodland Protectors again going to try and use their javelins to bring the situation under control. Will they find success? I mean, the Goblin Infantry are very likely to break, but the Sauron's will much less so. Having said that, they're wavering. Javelin volleys, and in the presence of the Wardens of Amon Lank, is a reason to be concerned, I suppose. Their morale's stabilising slightly, but they're in a little bit of trouble here. Warg Skirmishers probably going to rout. Those Cave Trolls continuing to swing their hammers on logs. But the line holds. The line remains reasonably solid. These Goblins and Orcs that have found their way into the backfield are ultimately going to be dealt with. Trolls were at the centre of that as well, some Snow Trolls. Elves of the Elven King moving backwards. Are the defenders thinking about retreating? We shall wait and see. Witchram Scourge Raiders are going to try and shoot into the side of this line, and they're going to succeed. That's not great. The defenders really need to make that not happen. Throwing axes like that can be so deadly, especially into the back of more lightly armoured troops. Stuff like the Nandor Glade Guard and Morikwendi pikes are exactly the sort of thing that they want that to happen to. But all of the upper end Misty Mountains and Angmar units are proving a little bit too much here for the defenders to deal with, and they are going to try and retreat here. Will they be successful? WK has been really good at force pathing some individual units here to make life very difficult for the defenders. And he left his Hammer Guard in there a little bit too long, Eclipse, and he's going to be made to pay for that pretty severely, because he's going to lose them. And that is quite the important unit to be losing Their armour piercing gives them a real edge over a lot of the orcs they're going to be facing off against. They're going to try and save them, but in so doing you're just going to be dooming another unit of Morroquendi bows as well, so doubling down really on not the greatest judgment call. You can see there the Silverthorn arrows from the Elders of the Elven King. Blackback Berserkers, once their hit points are gone, are actually a good target to go after with your archers. Their armour is actually not the best relative to other units like this, and of course they're unshielded. This Morroquendi bow is going to try and lead now, but oof. And the orcs now pushing forwards, and Woodland Protectors trying to act as a rear guard. Will they be able to get those Wardens of Amon-Lank out of here? They should do. They've got the perfect opportunity to now that they've routed another unit of heavy goblin infantry. As once again they leave. The trolls causing havoc. Cave trolls will be able to do this for less time than we saw some of the heavier trolls earlier do it for, but could still be an absolutely vital tool. More Elders of the Elven King up here on the high ground, as are the Wardens of Amon-Lank. Protectors in play, continuing to push forward actually, seeing the opportunity that the defenders may not regain their cohesion here, and the Blackback Berserkers pushing in. I mean, they're taking a lot of arrows and javelins directly, which is going to be a problem for them in the long run, but if they can just keep the pressure up, they could give the opportunity for their fellow orcs to romp home to victory. And there goes the Dorwinion general. The Vintner Lord falls. More Silverthorns raining down upon the Blackbacks and on the Orc fellas. Interesting to still see Orc fellas alive, actually. They've done quite well for themselves to accomplish that. There's still fighting going on this front line. What do they have over here? It must have been a unit of fairly good quality, if they are still able to put up a fight. Nandor Gladeguard. Melee defense paying dividends. Do they still have crossbow ammunition? They should still have Witcher ammunition, I would suggest. Scourge Raiders taking a bit of damage. I will say I don't think the attackers needed quite so many bodyguard tier units. Like, there was no way that the Goblin armies needed a unit of Goblin King's bodyguard each, and both had 2 units of Blackback Berserkers, and that's the sort of trend which carried across all the attacking armies. I think that's why we've seen this shape of battle become more and more the norm. In 5v3s, it's because people who are making these battles give the attackers too many bodyguard units, because they're so difficult to get rid of in the late game, and all the attackers need to do is play the game from the attacking perspective by the book, and it's very difficult for the defenders to come back. I think in future I would urge scenario makers to go a little bit if it's a 5v3 anyway, go a little bit easier on the high quality units that you give the attackers. Like, through sheer numbers alone, they will have the easier ride of the 2 teams anyway. You don't need to make it even easier for them by giving them all of their high tier toys. It's just not something that's required. We saw several examples of large scale routes from the attackers today, and it didn't really faze them when, from a gameplay perspective, I would argue that it should have. Their attacks fell apart one too many times for the battle to still be so clearly in their favour. That would be my criticism of how the scenarios are being balanced at the moment. Other than that, however, the maps and the scenarios themselves have only been getting better, which is a good thing. Here Pang, firing in point blank into these Scourge Raiders. They're going to try and potentially get some of those throwing axes off. Do they still have a catapult? I think the trolls still have their own catapult, do they not? Even once they... yeah, they are. They're firing directly over, trying to get some sort of hit, but it will be difficult from that sort of angle. The trolls themselves... ooh, direct hit. Very nice too. The trolls themselves that are manning the catapult will also still be somewhat useful. But yeah, at this point it's clear the attackers are in the ascendancy, and the defenders can only hope to kill off as many orcs as they possibly can. But this perhaps is thematic, because it means I may very well end up doing the Thranduil's Hall's battle that MSQ2 sent me directly after this, because it would follow on almost perfectly. Those Wardens of Amon-Lank, ideally suited for facing off against the Minas Morgul's Chosen. Back go the Woodland Protectors. At this point there's no real need for nuance, but I suppose if you want to get as many kills as possible, you want to use as many javelins as you possibly can as well. As the orcs. I mean, by orc standards, I suppose this is organised. Direct hit there by the catapult, a little bit further up. Technically, I suppose they could retreat yet further, but not much. Getting some nice hits. Try and compress that percentage down as far as you can. 4% is the difference, which is surprising when you consider the gulf in numbers between the two sides at this point. Silverthorn arrows doing their thing. The Blackguard. I would give a special mention to WK actually. I think the individual moments where he decided to commit his units in this fight were the sort of thing which made it put it beyond the defenders at that point when he, following up Tundra's Fox's army, they really put the screws to the defenders there. Meanwhile, some woodland protectors and what's left of some Hearing Peng trying to deal with these cave trolls. Another point-blank catapult blow. Guardians of Khan Doom arrive on the front line. Temple Executions again, another example of a bodyguard unit. Another unit of Blackback Berserkers. Yeah, that would be my feedback to Morris. There's no need to lay on the attacking Uber tier units so thick in a 5v3. Like, their army should be mostly low to mid tier units. Perhaps in some cases exclusively low to mid tier units, in fact. Here comes some heavy goblin spears. Another hit from the catapult. Continuing to do damage. Silverthorn arrows crisscrossing both sides. Morikwendi bows will try and rout off some of the low tier units with that poison attack. And they may very well be successful. It's still a reasonably close fight in spite of the change that I would have suggested. Heavy goblin infantry moving forwards. There's still some more orc javelins, more Angmar marauders. What happened to that troll catapult crew? Who knows? I've seen stranger things. Catapults. I'm surprised those orc javelins are not routing actually after a direct hit when there's only 11 of them remaining. But look at this. There's still Hammer Guard, 41 of them. The elves forced onto the back foot. As soon as the river defence folded on one side and they didn't retreat as a coordinated whole, it was always going to be pretty hard for them. There's still some snow trolls left as well. We've already seen 2 units of them perish. They're going to pull themselves off the front line, perhaps not wishing to get up close and personal with Wardens of Amonlank. This is certainly punishing for the orcs, as Blackback Berserkers and Goblin King Bodyguard push their way up, and they're going to try and silence that catapult from Morris, as still the elves are fighting backwards, trying to just dig in and face the orcs from only one direction, but it's... in truth, the battle was over a while back. Another Hammer Guardsman. Still a few elves left over on this side as well, but surely that's not going to last too much longer. Most of their unit already retreated, so they're going to probably try and force plant their way through the bulk of the orc army. And then heavy goblin spears moving forward in formation as well. A snow troll continuing to bully the elf catapult crew. To be fair, the units of elves that are left are no pushovers. Elves of the Elven King and Warns of Amonlank are strong, firing point blank. Snow trolls in and amongst them as they completely ignore them really. A few of them have decided to pull out their blades. I'm very surprised if the snow trolls didn't fall. Next patch, of course, we'll see a new model for the snow trolls, which will bring them more into line with the newer troll models that we've seen elsewhere. That unit model for the snow trolls is still a vanilla one after all. And it does look a little goofy. I'll be a little sorry to see it go, but the new version of Snow Trolls is much better and much more befitting of a scary unit rather than a derpy one. A lot of these Hammer Guard caked in blood, their enemies and their own. And this, I believe... No, it's Morris's. I thought for a sec. I thought it was Lango's, but of course Lango with the unfortunate loss of his general earlier on, but not really too much of an affecting factor for Mirkwood. Their morale is good enough that they can definitely ride that to a certain extent. There are limits, of course, but in a situation like this, like it's much more of a damaging thing if the Misty Mountains or Mordor are to lose their general, of course, as the Orcs flood forward again. We didn't really see the Witches in this battle. They weren't really required in the end. As we have a look at the kill difference, 7%, that's not half bad. The defenders, I think, can hold their head up high, given the odds were very much against them. It always is in a 5v3, and this was a very difficult one as well. Several things as well, like that ambush. Morris's initial ambush didn't go quite as well as he would have hoped, and that's quite a lot of troops that he wasn't able to get good value with, which is a significant factor. More javelins flying overhead, and they're going to try and point blank shoot with the Witches. No, they're just going to use them in melee. Some Angmar Marauders and Orc fellas pushing their way to the top of the hill as well. And Thranduil's Realm lies open for attack, and that may very well be the next replay that you see from me. Still some blackbacks here as well, very depleted at this point, but they were an important unit for really hammering home the attacker's advantage here in the late game. Snow Trolls continuing to do their thing, Warns of Ammon Lanks surrounded on all sides, and still there are goblins. Still there's heavy goblin infantry in there, which is amusing considering how they've been pummeled throughout the whole battle, routed, killed. And yet, in typical Misty Mountains fashion, there's still a few of them left standing at the end because there's just too damn many of them for the elves to deal with on this occasion. Textbook Misty Mountains. What's going on there? Angmar pulling some of their units back. And there will be Snow Trolls left at the end as well, unless all four of them spontaneously combust. As I said that, it would have been amusing if all four of them got killed by that catapult volley. Or shot. A single shot does not make a volley. And that is going to be that. 6% actually in the end, so the defenders did actually pull back a percentage point as they fought their way backwards in this final stand. Not bad. Not bad at all. Look at the size of the attacking armies as well as the quality as well. That is a scary, scary thing to behold. 3,227 was the smallest of the 5 armies they had to deal with, and the defending armies, of course, really quite small indeed. If you added all 3 of them together, they would only be able to outnumber a single one of the attacking armies, which goes to show the odds were very much against them. But very well done to them as well. They had a lot of quality of their own. A very interesting map. Like, this is the sort of thing, like, scenarios have been good lately. Lots more maps, lots of creativity going on, and you love to see it. That's the sort of thing. Like, new content is the lifeblood of games such as this, and it's really good to see that the creative juices are still flowing, and people are still interested in doing this sort of thing. So what did the damage for the Misty Mountains? Snow Trolls and Cave Trolls doing very, very well. So once they get into melee, Trolls will do damage, even if they're up against some good quality units. And it goes to show there, I think the timing of the Trolls' usage was pretty good. Warg Skirmishers also doing quite well. So this is Mevon's army. Warg Skirmishers being utilised to pretty good effect as well. So covering, being used as more of a supporting tool. And that's exactly what you need to use Warg Skirmishers for generally, but especially in a situation like this where elves are going to be trying to use a bit of trickery to equalise the numbers a little bit. Blackback Berserkers doing very, very nicely for themselves, especially considering that they were only committed late on when the elves only really had a lot of quality as well. The Mangonel... Oh no, that's... I was looking at the wrong thing there. I thought for a second there it got 0 kills, but no, 96. Seems about right. One of those, of course, was a general. which is always interesting, but no other units getting over 100 kills, but that's not too surprising when you consider the fact that the attackers had the defenders so outnumbered. There's only so many kills for the attackers to go around. But yes, indeed. Big thank you to Morris for sending this one to me. You may have seen this one from the perspective of Tundra's Fox, but Morris actually sent me both his perspective and this one, and he recommended the attacking one, I suppose because of the ambushy nature of the opening phases, and I would tend to agree. So I'm glad that I did things this way around. But also a big thank you to Tundra's Fox and the rest of the players as well for being a part of this one. Always good to see another large-scale scenario. And it's always nice when someone wants me to show one off as well, because they tend to be the most popular thing that I do. But yeah, I think next up I was going to do Moria, of course, but I think I will do Thranduil's Halls next because it follows on from this one quite nicely. So I think that one will be the next replay that we do, and then, unless I get sent another scenario, of course, because battles like this always take priority because they tend to be brand new, and no one's ever seen them before, and they always tend to be good, so I push them to the front of the queue. So if I do get another scenario, of course, I will push that one to the front, but if I don't, then it will be Thranduil's Halls next, followed by Moria, and then I have another siege battle as well, which may very well be on Merlond. By the time this comes out, it'll be a little while since we've done Merlond. It's not my favourite map, as people know, but it is still another 5v3 that we see. Perhaps we'll see Merlond work out in a different way for once. I doubt it, but I'm sure we'll get there at some point. I've got a few replays as well, which I can't remember all of them, but those are the three that stick out in my mind, three classic maps that we've seen several times before, which we will be seeing over the course of the next... Even if I get more scenarios, we'll be seeing them over the course of the next month or so, regardless. So yes, big thank you to all the players and to Morris, once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.